I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my courageous co-host, Brett.
Oh, I think that's your best yet, Alice. I'm very impressed.
I love me some puns.
You do love you some puns. I love some puns. I love your puns, always.
Well,
it's the best part of
you
Legal
are
Briefs.
Courageous, but I'm not saying that with an accent. It's because we are finally talking about another case that actually has dominated headlines, but we've been so pulled into other true crime headlines that we haven't had a chance to talk about Kouri Richins, the woman who is currently accused and charged with the murder of her husband by making him a Moscow mule laced with fentanyl. And that in and of itself is attention-grabbing fact pattern. But that's not really why she's been in the news, because there's been so much other things going on in her case that actually have nothing to do with the substance of the case. And we're here to talk about why, even though you may have seen lots of headlines about it, they are not really substantive.
Yeah, this is a case I feel like if there wasn't so much else going on, would just be all over the place. Like if there were no Delphi, if there were no Murdaugh, if there were no Idaho, no Lisk, no Karen Reed. Like if you didn't have any of that, this case would be like 24/7 because the facts are so wild. As some of you may recall, not only is she accused of killing her husband, but she also wrote a book for her children on how to deal with the grief of losing her husband, which is, if she's guilty, is one of the most callous things I can imagine someone doing.
And she really does check all the boxes of becoming national media attention. She is, I think, objectively very attractive. She's young. She has young children. What's coming out in the fact pattern so far of what she's accused of doing is this was not the first time she tried to kill him, and she potentially tried previous times and was unsuccessful and didn't hide very well her attempts at getting fentanyl, which is what ultimately killed him. Getting fentanyl, even though she's not a user. But what we are here to talk about is, Brett, do you have a dog?
I do have a dog.
Do you walk the dog?
I do walk him on occasion. He walks himself often.
Is that code for anything to you?
No. When I go to walk the dog, I'm literally walking the dog.
Exactly. But walk the dog here. We are going to talk about a lot of things, including a letter that's now been called the Walk the Dog letter, and some motions to dismiss that have been filed in the case and the court recently ruling on it, and lots of other documents and whether they are attorney-client privilege or not. I mean, this case, devastating for the children, devastating for the victim, and the fact that, a wife here is accused of murdering her children's father and her husband, but it's chocked full of interesting legal issues that create a great platform for us to kind of educate all of you on what these terms mean and what you should be looking for as this case gets moving.
So I'm just going to give you guys a quick background on the case itself, and then we're going to dive into these interesting questions about attorney-client privilege and several other things that I think the Walk the Dog letter will really, as Alice said, help us to explain. So Kouri Richins, if you don't know who she is, she was married to a man named Eric Richins, and they had been going through marital problems, but not sort of the typical marital problems you might expect. Eric believed that his wife was trying to kill him, and in fact, believed she had attempted to poison him on multiple occasions. In fact, he told his family that if anything were to happen to him, she was to blame, which... And that'll be a really interesting evidentiary question as well, whether or not that comes in, because that's an out-of-court statement that'll be introduced to the truth of the matter asserted, which is hearsay. And we've done a hearsay episode that we've never released. At some point, we should release it.
We haven't released it yet?
No, it's still like
there's
sitting
been
in
that much Delphi news?
I know. It's been that way.
We should really release it because people, I think, will learn a lot from it.
We should. It's like the first of a series on hearsay. Anyways, so he tells her that, tells his family that. but he's staying in the marriage because of the children, which, look, on one complicated social question, is it better to try and keep the family together when your wife is trying to murder you? I'm not sure. Ordinarily, I would say that's admirable. This may be a circumstance in which, you know what, better just to go your separate ways. But he doesn't do that. He stays with her. And by the end of his life, his wife had taken out not one, not two, not three, at least 4 life insurance policies worth $2 million on her husband. And one of the reasons she was doing this is because she was spending tons of money without his knowledge. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he had confronted her about this, and she said she would pay him back.
And, you know, I just want to harken back to our Murdaugh episodes when a lot of people kept saying money is not enough to make people kill their own family who they otherwise may love. I mean, I think this case is going to shed a lot of light on motivations. And I do think this is such an interesting case because we have the instance of a woman killing a man. Oftentimes we see kind of the flip side fact pattern where an abused woman continues to stay in a marriage, whether for the kids or because they love their spouse, even though he's abusive, they stay. I think there's something about this case because it's flipped gender-wise for us to really be able to see clearly the financial motives here and how clearly they play into doing the unthinkable, killing the father of your children, killing your spouse. When you, I don't know, maybe people don't believe it when it's women. I'm gonna say it. Sometimes people don't believe women. I believe women. But I'm trying to make a point that there is a reason I think people are kind of beginning to understand those financial motives and how that may be enough. And that's what we see here, right? Kouri wasn't just spending a little bit of money on the side. She didn't just have like a small little Amazon habit. She was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars without Eric's knowledge. And guess what? They are a family. He knows this is happening. He finds out. And they are a family. She can't be spending like this. They have young children. They have a house. They have a life together. She needs to stop this. And so he does what probably any of us would do. He confronts her and says, like, you need to stop spending money like this and you can't continue these habits. And I know you've been stealing money from me to do this without me knowing. And she, immediately tries to make peace and says, don't worry, I'm going to pay you back. It's not a big deal. He may not have known the full depth of it, but he knew it wasn't going to end. And so in 2020, to prevent further kind of financial damage or ruin that she was causing, Eric moved property and money into a trust, and he consulted a divorce attorney. But it didn't stay there because they're still married and there's still legal rights, between the two. And in January 1st of 2022, Kouri switched herself to the beneficiary on a $2 million life insurance policy and tried to move some other property around, but Eric found out. And Brett, oh my gosh, if I found out my spouse had just changed themselves as the beneficiary on my life insurance policy, I'm not sure all I would do is switch it back, because Eric did switch the life insurance policy back to who the beneficiary was before, which was not Kouri. But that's all he did. I'm pretty sure I would start running.
We have talked about this before, and it is equally applicable here. No one is blaming him for what's going to happen to him. No one deserves to be murdered. But it is important, I think, for all of us to educate ourselves on red flags, on listening to your intuition, on taking the appropriate action when people are doing things that should be concerning. And there is a lot going on here that should be concerning. The money is a huge thing. Her wanting the money is a huge thing. The thing about life insurance is you only collect on it if someone's dead. So if she's switching the beneficiary, she's anticipating receiving that money, probably not in 50 years when Eric dies of old age, right? I mean, this is a more immediate thing. So yes, I agree with you, Alice. I think if that ever happens to you, if something like that happens to you, you at least need to have some real serious conversations with your wife about what exactly is, or husband, about what exactly is going on. I mean, maybe you could imagine how this could happen, and it's not, oh, I'm going to murder you and I wanted to make sure I got the $2 million. There might be some legitimate reason to do it, But given that the whole purpose of this life insurance policy, remember, she has others. The purpose of this life insurance policy is for the business. If one of the business partners dies, you want to make sure that the business can continue going forward. I mean, that's what they're doing. So this is not a life insurance policy really intended for her. So the fact that she's doing this should be really troubling in a lot of different ways. So at this point, so this is January 1st, 2022. Now, this has been going on for years. As we pointed out, 2020, he's moving property into trusts. He's trying to protect it from Kouri. He's talking to a defense attorney.
And I have to note, when he's doing that, like, there are lots of different relationship dynamics. Here, he's doing it to try and protect it for his kids and for their life together. He has a business, and he's not trying to like hide money from her. He is trying to protect it so that it doesn't keep flowing out in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Exactly. So at this point, we're into 2022, and this is when things start getting, this is when, according to the prosecution, Kouri begins to plan the murder of her husband. So she speaks with someone that is sort of like, I mean, for a while, this person, we didn't know who this person was. They were known as CL. I think, Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a housekeeper. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
I think they had some properties, like whether it was like real estate or Airbnb or something. It wasn't just like their own housekeeper, but someone, they had a business and they had to like clean lots of commercial properties. Commercial being they made money off of it, not like office buildings.
Right. And Kouri was in real estate, and she purchased and sold real estate. I think there's something about right around when this is happening, she wanted to purchase a very expensive house, and I think her husband had kind of pushed back on that, and that could also be something that drove this event. But she reaches out to this person. I'm still going to use her, even though it's now public who it is, I'm still going to use her initials, CL, and asked her about fentanyl. And we talk about this sometimes. Most of you out there probably don't know how to get fentanyl. You know, you're not somebody who would know where to go to get fentanyl. So if you need fentanyl or something along those lines, you're going to have to ask somebody. And this is where you can get in trouble later on if something like this happens. So she reaches out to this person and asks, where can I get fentanyl? And this person apparently knew where to get it. So on around February 11th or 12th, she gives her fentanyl. At this point, we know that Kouri deleted all the data on her phone. She reset her phone on this date. So we have CL telling us right around this time, Kouri comes to me and asks for fentanyl. At the same time, Kouri is deleting all this stuff on her phone. And this is a really good example of circumstantial evidence because we can't see what was there on her phone. We can't see messages with her asking for fentanyl. But the fact that she deleted it and the timing coincides with this is the kind of thing that you as a jury can make an inference about. Why would she do that? Because she's destroying evidence.
Yeah. And so here's even more kind of circumstantial evidence. So we have February, 11th or 12th. She's getting the fentanyl from this housekeeper. She's deleting all the data on her phone. And then on February 14th, Valentine's Day, Eric became seriously ill after eating a sandwich that none other than Kouri had made for him, to the point where he thought he was going to die and he had to use an EpiPen. And after this event, very interestingly, instead of saying, oh, I must have had an allergic reaction to something or wasn't that a strange event, he has consciousness of what's going on because he told a friend he thought Kouri had poisoned the sandwich. I mean, this begins to show the fact that he told his friend shows that he has awareness of what is going on here, right? This is not an accident. He sees the big picture of what's happening. And he even tells a friend something that maybe a lot of us would feel like, ooh, I can't say this out loud because can't possibly be true. My spouse can't possibly be trying to kill me. And you know what? This doesn't deter Kouri. Sometimes we will find that if someone tries to kill someone and they're not successful, it's like, ooh, that was scary. I got a thrill from it. It didn't work, but I got away with it. So that's it. She doesn't give up because she goes back to CL and says, I need stronger drugs. What you gave me wasn't good enough. And to better understand kind of where Kouri was at this time, we knew that she was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. We know that Eric was confronting her about it, but the extent of how much financial trouble she was in, I think is helpful to understand where she is. Not that it makes any excuse, but it begins to show you the motive. So at this time, Kouri owed $1.8 million to moneylenders, $189,000 to the IRS, and $500,000 to her husband. I mean, put that all together is well over $2 million. What, $2 million that she is in debt. And it's unclear how she's going to get out of this, except remember that life insurance policy. When she switched it over, it was for $2 million.
And, one thing I want to point out, we talked about him using an EpiPen. Don't get confused and think that she was trying to create some sort of allergic reaction for him. She used the fentanyl. It seems like it was probably poor grade fentanyl, low fentanyl, not very toxic. It doesn't take a lot of fentanyl to kill you, but it seems like this was not very good fentanyl. The EpiPen, yes, typically you would use that for an allergic reaction, but remember, it contains adrenaline, epinephrine. I think basically what happened is the effect of that, which is, opening up your airways, opening up your blood vessels, a shot of adrenaline essentially saved his life because the level of the drug was so low or was so poor.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. And also, like, when you are having an overdose reaction to fentanyl, it can sometimes feel like you're suffocating as well. And so adrenaline, just think about all the things that people are purported to have done under an intense rush of adrenaline, right? Like mothers are able to pick up trucks when the truck is rolled over their young child because of a rush of adrenaline, not necessarily from an EpiPen, but because their body is like going into, fight mode to save life. So we've heard of these stories of what adrenaline can allow a person to do, superhuman things. And so the EpiPen is a way of delivering adrenaline to your body, which can cause you to basically just maybe be enough to like pump enough blood to his heart to save his life at that moment.
Exactly. But Kouri is committed. And as Alice said, she wants better stuff. So this was in February when this happened. March 4th, 2022. Kouri is celebrating the closing of a business deal, and she suggests, let's have a drink to celebrate. And so she goes to make her husband a Moscow Mule. Now, this is what the prosecution said happened. She's also going to say that he took an edible, like a marijuana, THC edible. I don't know. I don't know anything about drugs. You guys know more about drugs than I do. So, but anyway, she's going to say that. The prosecution are going to say, okay, whatever with that. She also made him a Moscow Mule. She gives him the Moscow Mule. She says she falls asleep. At some point, she comes back. She wakes up and she finds him dead. The police, the medical examiner will say that he had 5 times the amount of fentanyl needed to kill him, which isn't that much fentanyl because fentanyl is really dangerous. But a couple interesting things he says. Number one, he says it was orally administered and it was not medical grade. So this is street fentanyl, and it was something that he took orally. Now, this is in March 2022. It took a while for the police to arrest her. It took about a year. And in that time, she wrote this book, Are You With Me?, which was intended to be a book to help her children with grief that she then marketed. I think she was on the TV a few times talking about it. At the same time, she's engaged in some civil litigation with the family of her husband who are trying to recover some of his property, in which obviously she's trying to keep because she needs the money and needs it desperately. But despite the fact it took the police a while, eventually they did arrest her. So she has been arrested in Utah. She's been charged with murder. And the one thing that's not happening is the prosecution's not seeking the death penalty, which means this probably will go to trial because I don't think they're going to cut a deal with her. And she doesn't have a lot to lose. Now, she has an interesting defense. At least she did before we get to the topic of today's episode, where I think she kind of shot herself in the foot pretty bad. But nevertheless, as some of you know, hopefully all of you know, if you don't, consider this a public service announcement. Fentanyl is a huge problem. And it's a huge problem in sort of the drug, if you take drugs, the drug community. The reason for this is what will happen is people will sell things that they say are one thing, ecstasy. Maybe a marijuana edible would be an example of that. But instead of being whatever they're supposed to be, they actually are just, pressed pills of nothingness that are sprayed with fentanyl. And the idea is the person will take the pill, they'll get the high from the fentanyl, they'll believe that they were sold what they were told they were getting, the drug dealers make the money, and it's much cheaper and easier because fentanyl is incredibly toxic. It takes a very small amount of it to kill you and even less to make you high. So rather than having to import a whole bunch of other kinds of drugs, you can tell people, oh, this is the thing you want. And in fact, it has a very low amount of the fentanyl on it. So it's really a great way to make money if you're selling drugs. The problem is it is very easy to give people too much of it, and that will lead to an overdose. And what we're seeing a lot of are people who don't normally take drugs, who aren't sort of abusers of drugs or only recreational users who buy a pill here or there. We're seeing sort of kids who think they're buying some sort of, one-off drug who, their parents find them dead the next morning because they took the pill, they were going to stay up all night and work, whatever, they end up dead. So what you could imagine happening, it is not a bad story. It's not a bad theory for her to say, my husband bought an edible. We had no idea. Someone must have laced it with fentanyl. He took it and he died. It had nothing to do with me. I think that is sort of the defense that she always intended to put forward.
Yeah. If this is not clear so far, anyone listening, stay away from fentanyl. Stay away from drugs in general, especially
drugs
today.
Are bad, kids.
Drugs are definitely bad, but Brett and I have been to countless trainings at this point from law enforcement about the pervasiveness of fentanyl being laced in drugs, or even what you think may be over-the-counter prescription painkillers that are not even what you normally think of as taking drugs, like cocaine or meth or, opioids or something like that. And we are seeing very, very young victims fall prey to this. And it's not just because they're young and don't know anything about the world. This lacing of fentanyl is such a moneymaker for people who sell drugs that it's just invading every drug market that we see. So be careful and educate everyone around you about it. Talk to kids about it. Don't take anything that you don't know where it came from.
And what we're starting to see is dealers who don't even know they have it, who think they bought what they wanted. Because we'll see on the wires, we'll see them say things like, I don't do fent. I don't deal in that. Because they want to stay away from it. Because the problem is, if you sell somebody one of these pills and they die, and we find you and prosecute you, you're going away for a lot longer than you would just for selling drugs. If someone dies because of what you sold them, that your sentence goes way up. So a lot of them want to stay away from it, but they can't because it's become so infected in just the supply of the drugs that people are getting that it's impossible really to stay away from. And there's just a lot of fentanyl out there and people don't know about it. Naloxone will counteract it if you catch it quickly enough. That's one good thing. So you do have a tool for it, but it's a problem. It's a really big problem. And that could have been really valuable for Kouri Richins because she could easily say, this wasn't me, this came from somewhere else.
And, this is kind of like we were talking about in other cases where you can seize on the satanic panic or whatever is sweeping the country. This is quite literally sweeping the country. Every day on CNN or another news outlet, you can see some horrifying story of a dog at a dog park in California eating or sniffing some dog poop and it had fentanyl in it and the dog dies, right? I read that story the other day. So this is actually a real fear and very well publicized. And I think she would have done well, but then she couldn't help herself because on September 18th, Kouri is accused by the prosecution of witness tampering. And how was she accused of doing it? Well, since she's being charged with murder, she is held in a jail right now, pending her trial, and you get searches on your cell pretty regularly. And during one of these searches, a 6-page handwritten letter was found in Kouri's cell, in a book, I believe. Might even have been an LSAT book, I've heard. But anyways, they find this letter, and you are looking at it on the screen right now if you're on YouTube. And at the very top, the reason we said walk the dog at the very beginning is in huge font at the top of this letter. It says, walk the dog. But in this letter, Kouri writes to her mom, suggesting that her brother Ronnie should testify that Eric bought drugs in Mexico, regularly. He was addicted to drugs or whatever. He regularly went to Mexico. He had a drug problem. And Kouri sought to establish that Eric was always taking drugs, hiding it from her, and particularly the pills. And she was just this, woe is me, I didn't know anything. He was leading this double life, and look where it ended up. It ended up with Eric being dead. And it's not just this letter. You should go read this letter, by the way, because it is a fascinating letter. She mentions lawyers a lot. She mentions legal standards a lot of what needs to be proven and how Ronnie should say certain things in order to make sure he gets in the record certain things to meet legal standards. But it's not just this letter, because later in a jailhouse call, which we've told you time and time again, jailhouse calls are recorded, period. Right? Even when you talk to your attorney, we're just not allowed to listen to the calls when it's an attorney. But every line you pick up in the jailhouse is just recorded. You have no expectation of privacy when you are in jail. So she calls her mom, and it's on this recorded line, and she says she's writing a fictional mystery book based on her life story. And you're right. This is now her story. She says this 6-page letter has nothing to do with witness tampering or coaching my brother on what to say in order to meet the legal standards so that I can beat this murder charge. No. I have a creative outlet. I am writing a book. You can see my other publication. It's called Are You With Me? I've already written one book. This is my next book. It's a fictionalized version of what I know best, which is my own life. So that's what this is. This is my script, my manuscript. Please give it back so I can finish this book, get a publisher, and get a Netflix deal. That last part I'm making up, but you get what I'm saying. And so this letter has caused a lot of motion practice in court because though the prosecution have alleged that she is witness tampering, she shoots back and says, the prosecution should dismiss the case. They should be kicked off the case because there's been prosecutorial misconduct, because not only is this fictional, but this is attorney-client privilege because I sent it to my attorney. So there we are.
Yeah. So there's a lot to break down there. I mean, so one thing they complained about, the defense, if you can find the letter and sort of read some of it, usually the Walk the Dog page that I have here, I don't know that you can read the entire letter, but we have the first page. Maybe you can read the entire letter. I can't even remember if I read the entire letter.
The whole letter is online. It's
okay,
like
so
on one
can.
of those, like you have to scroll within a little box.
Oh, yeah. So there are a few things that happened here. Number one, the prosecution says they found it during this jail search, which the Supreme Court has said you have no right to privacy in your jail cell. So if that's true, no biggie. She says, no, this was in attorney mail. I was giving this to my attorney. Now, the interesting thing, and we're going to talk about this in a second, if she was doing that, she was giving it to her attorney to deliver to her mother. That's the first thing. The second thing, the prosecution filed this motion, and essentially it contained a couple things. Number one, it indicated that they thought she was trying to tamper with witnesses, and it asked for an order from the court that she could no longer speak to her mother or brother. And they filed this publicly. This is sort of the inverse of the Odinist Frank's motion in Delphi. The prosecution filed this publicly. And there is a gag order, I guess, in this case. So the defense comes back and they say a few things. They say, you violated my rights to communicate with my attorney, number one. And number two, by filing this publicly, you have tainted the jury pool for all time. It can never be dealt with. So therefore, the only remedy is to dismiss the case against me, file the motion to dismiss, file the motion for sanctions. And that sort of is before the court to consider. Once again, if this were a bigger deal case, people would have been losing their minds. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, even in the Delphi case, nobody's filed a motion to dismiss the indictment. But here, the whole case could go away. You can imagine the way Twitter would react to a filing like that in Delphi. They'd lose their minds. We would get 1,000 emails. Is this going to happen? Should we be concerned? Right? So that's happening in this case because of this letter.
Okay, so there's a... do we do an attorney-client legal briefs? I don't even know.
I don't think we ever have. So this will be a mini attorney-client privilege.
Maybe this could easily spawn into 10 different legal briefs because there's so many issues raised here. So the search in her cell is something that happens pretty regularly. You can imagine why. Contraband is pretty common. Jails and prisons are just pretty porous. There are visitors who come in. There's lots of contraband that comes in. We always joke, you're not supposed to have a cell phone in jail or prison, right? That seems pretty standard. That's why there's phones there. I've yet to meet an informant, Brett, that we worked with in jail who didn't have a phone. I mean, it's just everybody has one. So in other words, contraband is incredibly common. And because it's common, searches are pretty typical. They're not necessarily looking for that phone. They're looking for drugs. They're looking for knives, anything dangerous, because obviously violence in the prison system is very dangerous for the guards and for the other inmates as well. And so these sweeps are for safety reasons, for security reasons, those sorts of things. And they absolutely get to do that because just like they can record the jailhouse calls, they have the right to search your cell.
Well, I mean, this goes to something we've talked about before when you think about search warrants. And when do you need a search warrant? When can you be searched? When can't you be searched? People have sort of a very amorphous idea about that, and the case law can be confusing. But the principal idea at the heart of it is, if you have a right to privacy in the area to be searched, then you need a warrant. The thing about prison, a lot of your rights have gone away. One of them is your right to privacy. So it may be your, quote unquote, your cell, but it's not really. You have no right to privacy there. So routinely, the police, the guards, whatever, can search your cell, and whatever they find, they find. And this was litigated 40, 50 years ago. Supreme Court came out on the side of no. I mean, there were some arguments you should have some limited rights to privacy. Like even in prison, you should have some privacy rights. And the court was basically like, look, there's no way to police this, and we're not going to say you have that. So you don't have it. And that's why her twist on it of, well, this was intended to go to my lawyer. This was all, whether it's a little unclear exactly what she's arguing, whether it's full on, I actually sent this to my lawyer, the jail intercepted it, took it out of legal mail. So you have the mail, which you send out. Everything you send out from the mail is read and searched. If you send a letter to your family saying a bunch of stuff that incriminates you, the police are going to read it. There's this old joke about how an elderly father sends a letter to his son and says, I wish you were here. I can barely move around. I don't have anybody to help me with the garden. And his son sends him back a letter and says, well, whatever you do, don't touch the garden because that's where I buried all the bodies. And 2 days later, the police swarm the property and dig up the whole garden, and they don't find anything. And his son sends him a letter back and says, sorry about that whole police thing, Dad. That was the best I could do. Now at least your garden's dug up, right? And that's the thing. They're reading your mail. But legal mail is different. Legal mail is supposed to be between you and your attorney. You have attorney-client privilege. It's supposed to be about your case. They're not necessarily supposed to read it, or if they do, it's supposed to be done by sort of a third party to make sure it's what you're saying it is, that it's actually legal mail. So anyways, so that's sort of the spin on this by Kouri and her team is, no, this should be attorney-client privilege because I was sending it to my lawyer. The only thing I want to say about this is, Alice and I have been on Court TV a few times. We've watched Court TV. And when this was brought up to the experts on Court TV, they were like, whoa, well, if she was sending it to her lawyer, well, that's attorney-client privilege. Oh, my goodness. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this was to explain why that's not right.
All right, guys. It's not like, think about it. It's not a complete, quote, get out of jail free card that anything that is written attorney-client privilege on it or even sent to your attorney is necessarily attorney-client privileged material. So attorney-client privilege material has to be only between you and your attorney for legal advice for a case that is pending or going to be brought. Right? If you're just pontificating about the law in general with an attorney who you call your attorney, that's not attorney-client privileged material, right? It's actually a pretty narrow thing, whereas people try to make it this big, broad thing. And so the fact that you write attorney-client privilege on something, and by the way, lawyers do this all the time. When I send things to clients, when I write memos or drafts of things, I always write attorney-client privilege. That's just me hoping that someone will take my word for it, that it's attorney-client privilege. But the fact that I write attorney-client privilege on any document doesn't in and of itself wave a magic wand, like in Harry Potter, and now it's attorney-client privilege because it bears the words attorney-client privilege. No, it's not an abracadabra at all. There's a legal standard that it has to meet to be attorney-client privilege. And you can understand why that's the case. If I am trying to make sure no one reads anything that I have, create this massive loophole where I just write the words attorney-client privilege, ACP on everything, and no one can ever touch it for all time or even try to challenge what's in that material because it's somehow an iron vault door. So that's number one. Number two, just because you send something to your attorney doesn't mean it's attorney-client privilege. First of all, she's saying this is a fictional manuscript. Fictional manuscripts do not fall under legal advice for the prosecution of her case. So that in and of itself, in her own words, exempts it, or not exempts it, it just takes it out of the category of attorney-client privilege. Second, you can't use your attorney as like some sort of mail mule to funnel information through if the end result is to get it to somebody else. Right? Attorney-client, we've talked about this, is between you and the attorney. So you can't hand a letter meant for your co-conspirator and just deliver it through your attorney as the mail mule, and somehow because your attorney touched it, or it's addressed to your attorney, but it's not really meant for him, somehow converts it into attorney-client privilege.
And look, there have to be protections in place. We talked about this before with jail calls. Every now and then you'll see something about how the police were recording jail calls between a defendant and their attorney. The reason that is done is because, as Alice said, sometimes what they're discussing is an attorney-client privilege, and sometimes the other exception is coming into play, which is the crime-fraud exception. You cannot use your lawyer to commit a crime. So, for instance, let's say you wanted to commit obstruction of justice by having someone lie about things at your trial. You can't use your attorney to convey that message to them. That is not protected by attorney-client privilege. So oftentimes you'll have circumstances where, you know, the things you send your attorney or the things you say on the phone call are recorded in some way, and you have some sort of third party, someone who's not necessarily connected to the case. We call it, and I don't know why we chose this term, but we call it a taint team in the law.
Now that you say that, I think it's funny, even though I've managed many tank teams.
I know. It's just the worst possible term. But that's what we call it.
At one point, someone called me the tank queen. Now that I think about it, I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. We're talking like I had emails addressed to me as tank queen. I never thought about it until right now. Oh no. And I'm talking like official government documents.
Recorded forever in the National Archives as part of our history.
Oh my god!
Right next to the Gettysburg Address or Alice's emails.
The Gutenberg Bible and the Tank Queen. Oh my gosh, okay. Whew. Bring it back.
So anyway, those people who have that term applied to them, their job is to sort of act as an independent group of people who are not connected to the case, who can review things and can tell the actual prosecutors, like, yes, you can look at this. And the idea is you don't want the prosecutors, you don't want them to have that information in their mind. So if they have 3 documents, one of them's not protected and 2 of them are, you don't want them reading the 2 that are protected because that violates the privilege, even if the third one's not. So that's the purpose of that. So sometimes you'll have that. It's a little unclear exactly what was going on here, how they got this. Like I said, we have competing stories, but I think the important thing for the purpose of this case is no matter how they got it, this document wasn't protected by attorney-client privilege. I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit more about what happened. Once the police knew about this letter and the prosecution knew about this letter, they also started to have questions about other letters that had made it out, that they had not intercepted, documents that ended up with Kouri's mother and maybe other people, and they sought those documents. And the defense, and I'll tell you this, the defense attorney is in a really awkward place here because this letter mentions her on multiple occasions and sort of has her in the middle of this. I am somewhat surprised that she has not moved to withdraw from this case. I mean, it's probably the most famous case she'll ever have, so there's that aspect of it. But she's been made, personally, I would be very upset at my client for putting me in this position if I were her. But in any event, the police have sought all this evidence, all these other documents. They have asserted the privilege over those. And so what the court has done is kind of like that tank team we were just talking about. The court has appointed a third party, an independent third party, who is going to review the documents, make a determination on whether or not they're actually attorney-client privilege material or not. And if they're not, recommend to the court that they be released to the prosecution, who will then be able to use them in any future prosecution.
Well, okay, so there's different pages, 6 pages, I think, and she labels them page 1 through 6 at the very top. And at the very top of the first one, it says, walk the dog. And note on the side at the top, she also makes a little note, but take vague notes so you remember, which is very interesting because she's addressing her mom and brother. So
what are you talking about? This is a fictional novel.
As I'm interpreting the letter, I was just about to say, as interpreting the letter as what it's saying, to take vague notes. Yes, she does not take vague notes. She writes very detailed notes in here. I think it's worth kind of reading. We'll just start at the beginning. We won't read the whole letter, but it starts with Sky, the attorney, is saying, even if the gummies have fentanyl in them, the prosecutor will say, I tried to put the fentanyl in the gummies so Eric would have them. Let me just stop real quick. That's just the first sentence. Sure sounds like a fictional book. It's her attorney's name, her husband, who's dead's name, and the prosecutor, and in the first person, I. Of course, I have read fictional stories that are written like that, but use your own rational thinking as you read this and what you draw from this, whether it does sound like a manuscript or a fictional account of her life. She goes on to say, stupid, I know, but that's what she's thinking. We will still test them, though. However, she wants to link Eric getting drugs and this from Mexico, so we need some kind of connection. And what that's talking about there is, we've always said that the defense doesn't need to put on an affirmative story, but we know that the best story wins. And so, especially when you have a dead husband from fentanyl, you want to be able to tell the jury a story as to how that fentanyl got in his system, because that's undisputed. There was fentanyl in his system and he is now dead. And so it would be very helpful for the defense to have some sort of story as to how he could have gotten that fentanyl and how that fentanyl came from someone other than the person who's accused, Kouri. And she gets that. She's saying we need to get some connection as to how Eric himself is getting fentanyl here.
Which once again, this fits in perfect. So Sky, who's her attorney, is obviously having conversations with her, which, by the way, this letter breaches all the privileges of those conversations, which is why we can know about them. She's obviously having a conversation with her, laying it out for her. Like, look, this is the case we've got. And you're telling me, this is how I imagine this conversation went. You're telling me that there were some gummies, they had fentanyl on them. Well, even if that's true, the police are going to say you put the fentanyl on them. And she basically says that in the beginning. So I think Sky is really laying out for her the difficulties of their case and how it's going to be difficult to win, even if what she's saying is true. And maybe is actually telling her, and this is a reason you should consider pleading guilty.
Absolutely. So, that's a very good point, Brett. I want you to be reading this letter, and there could be no coaching going on from her attorney. I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and I can see this conversation playing out with her attorney, where her attorney's laying things out and being like, here's the problem with this case. There's fentanyl in his system. The jury's going to want another story. We have nothing that even begins to show how Eric could have had access to fentanyl at all. And she stops there. And she's not telling Kouri to find a connection or create a connection, but that's how Kouri is now writing this letter. She's like, this is the problem with my case. My attorney told me there was a problem. There's no connection. So here, I'm going to tell you how we're going to make that connection. And then she begins to lay out how to make that connection here through testimony. And this is where the allegations of witness tampering come up. I always forget how to read handwriting.
It's hard. They don't even teach people how to write anymore.
Okay, it's actually true. So then she goes on to say, here's what I'm thinking, but you have to talk to Ronnie. She has a brother named Ronnie. He would probably have to testify to this, but it's super short, not a lot to it. He will need to tell Sky at the meeting next week. So again, there's no reading between the lines. She's saying we need to make the connection. I'm going to tell you how we're going to make the connection. It's going to be through my brother, and he needs to tell my attorney at the next meeting so my attorney can say, that's the connection we were missing. Perfect.
Which is another reason if I were Sky, and Sky's stuck by her up to this point, I would be, I mean, she's setting this up where Sky doesn't know what's coming. Her brother's going to show up and give her this information. And Sky, of course, being a good attorney, is going to say, that's great. Let's go with that.
Absolutely. So she then writes out a script, what reads as a script of what Ronnie's supposed to testify. She writes, upon information and belief, in parentheses, just like they say. A year prior to Eric's death, Ronnie was over watching football one Sunday, and Eric and Ronnie were chatting about Eric's Mexico trips. Eric told Ronnie he gets pain pills and fentanyl from Mexico from the workers at the ranch. And he told not to tell me because I would get mad because I always said he just gets high every night and won't help take care of the kids. Parentheses, there are pictures in my phone of Eric passed out on the floor or in the chair. Ronnie should have texts from Eric talking about getting high as well. Close paren. Eric told Ronnie he keeps them in an allergy pill bottle in his work truck so I wouldn't find them. Ronnie never told me about the conversation. Eric finally told me and asked if CL could get him some. And I put CL in there. She actually wrote the name. Eric never wanted anyone to know he had an issue, especially get caught. He always wanted Kouri to go down for him. When they traveled, Eric would put his drugs in Kouri's bag at the airlines right before they boarded. That way, if they were caught, Kouri got in trouble, not him. Only they got to wherever they were going, Eric would pull the drugs out of her bag and it would cause a huge fight. She was pissed he would risk her going to jail for his drug use. He just would laugh about it. Eric couldn't ruin his image that he had drug issues, so he would do whatever he had to. Kouri has never done any type of pills, didn't like them. Rarely would she consume THC, only if Eric begged her because it was a special occasion.
Which, when she switches to the third person and she's telling, her exactly what to tell to her brother, is just so incriminating. Everything about this letter is so incriminating. And, her then attempting to use the recorded phone call, which she knows is recorded, and she knows the prosecution's going to get, to be like, and you should listen to it because we have the audio. She basically is like, God, this was all fictional. I can't believe they're taking it seriously. It's just, she is I hate to prejudge a case before it's been tried, but she is a piece of work. and this letter is so damning to her because it's funny. The prosecution presents it as obstruction of justice, and some people are like, oh, is she going to be charged for that and all sorts of stuff. It doesn't matter. What this is evidence.
And let me tell you something. Let's say some of you may be thinking, whoa, but what if this is all true, right? He really did do this, and she's just telling him her perspective. Doesn't matter. Even if this is true, you don't get to coach a witness what to say. Okay? So even, let's say all of this is true. The fact that she is telling Ronnie how to say it, even if she believes it's all true, even if it actually is factually true, doesn't matter. You know why? Guess who doesn't testify on the stand? Attorneys. That would make it so much easier if instead of having to take a direct and ask questions, a direct testimony of a witness, someone that I've prepped, instead of having to say, please state your name, and what do you do for a living? And how long have you been in that job? What if I just got on the stand and said, hey, this is my client, Kouri. She was married to someone who was a real scumbag who went to Mexico all the time. You can't do that because it's called coaching the witness. And the witness has to testify in their own words to truthfulness. So the fact that she's even writing this out is coaching him, even if she thinks it's true, which the way she's writing it in third person, just as a literary affect, I have questions about whether it is true.
And let's just imagine all you out there who are brothers and have a sister. And imagine your sister's husband died of a fentanyl overdose. And then your sister got arrested. And you're sitting there thinking, man, there are all those times that her husband talked to me about going to Mexico and getting fentanyl. Oh, well, I guess that's not relevant. Would that be your approach? Would you need your sister to write you a letter from prison and your mom to be like, hey, Kouri needs you to tell that story about how he had fentanyl? Would you need that to be like, oh, well, I guess that is relevant. Maybe I should go tell the police about that. Or would that be the first thing you would say? Like, whoa, guys, you're making a mistake. This dude told me all the time he's going to Mexico and doing fentanyl. That he just overdosed. This wasn't my sister. I mean, just the idea that if this were a true story, you would need to do this is so absurd. It's absurd on its face. It's just
it is absurd.
Silly.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett, for saying things that, I haven't really heard it said in the media. That no one has been like, this is absurd on its face that he would have to be told by his sister if this were true. And here's another part, okay? Right after this, she has like an asterisk, and she says, reword this however he needs to make the point. Just include it all. So, like, don't reword it. Say it exactly as I've written it, because this all needs to be in there. Okay, sorry, I'm getting a little worked up because it's just, this is quite the letter. I said I wasn't going to read it all, but now I'm just having fun reading it because I am actually able to read her handwriting now. Okay, and she says it has to be included all because she continues, the connection has to be made with Mexico and drugs. Ronnie will have the messages to prove Eric confided in him about getting high. It can be short and to the point, but has to be done. Upon information and belief, LOL. I didn't say LOL. The letter says LOL.
She's a piece of work. She's a piece of work. And look, I mean, there may be some truth in this because, as she said, her husband might have talked to Ronnie about getting high. Like, I mean, he may very well have done that. There's a lot of people out there who get high who don't take fentanyl, right? So, like we've often said, the whole a good lie has some basis of truth in it. I'm not questioning that Eric would occasionally take drugs. I don't think anybody's questioning that. But she is building this whole story around it that not only was he taking drugs, he was using fentanyl. And look, I'm not saying people don't take fentanyl, like intentionally take fentanyl. I'm sure they do. I think I've read some cases of nurses who were sort of taking, because fentanyl is a real drug. It's a legitimate drug. It's a great painkiller. Obviously, it's used in a lot of hospitals for a lot of different reasons. But I mean, that is very different from I like to get high, or I like to smoke pot, or I like to do various other things than I go to Mexico to get my fentanyl. And that's what she wants him to say.
By the way, it's a lot easier to get fentanyl in the United States where they live.
Yeah, you don't have, I mean, it comes from Mexico. But that's where her lie.
You don't
like
have to
she's
go
heard,
to Mexico. Right.
She's heard that fentanyl's all coming from Mexico, because it is. It's coming across the border from Mexico. A lot of it comes from China originally, and then and then the cartels ship it up. So she's heard that, so she's thinking, oh, well, his trips to Mexico, he'd pick up fentanyl while he was there.
And here's what's so interesting about this letter. So obviously, I told you at the very beginning, she's telling them to be careful, take vague notes so that people can't read your notes and figure out what you're trying to do. But she's so explicit in her letter. And in the next page, she says, when you talk to Ronnie about this, meet up with him in person. I worry sometimes your house and phone are bugged. Maybe drive down to SL and meet him after work without Bree. That's so interesting because she is probably rightfully so thinking like, people are listening, or we have to be careful about this. And why do you have to be careful, by the way? Because it's illicit. It shows her consciousness of improper actions here, right? Why do you have to be careful? Why would it matter if your phone was bugged and someone were hearing this if this were okay? She knows it's not okay. That's why this is all so interesting to read her own words about it. But she continues to make this point. Skye has to make the connection between Eric and Mexico because that makes the most sense in her mind. Notice she says her mind, her attorney's mind, because her attorney has sat down with her and said, there has to be a connection. There has to be a connection. So she is not tailoring this story, this testimony, this witness tampering to the jury. She's tailoring it to her attorney, because her attorney has told her what the problem is. And your attorney is supposed to do that. Your attorney is the one who's the most brutally honest to you in the privacy of your attorney-client privilege, because they want you to see all the parameters so you fully understand your risk and exposure in a case.
Yeah, and look, I think her lawyer is probably a pretty good lawyer and is really thinking through this. And it seems like Kouri is the kind of person who takes advantage of people and has done that her whole life and is really good at manipulating people. And the latest person she's going to manipulate is her attorney. And I just keep coming back to this because a lot of attorneys would seek to withdraw at this point. I mean, they really would. I mean, I don't know whether I'm impressed or questioning the judgment of her attorney that she's staying in it, but the level of manipulation of her attorney is really high.
I mean, again, it's in her own writing that she's manipulating her attorney, because still in this letter, she then goes on to say, If it's Ronnie's information and belief about the conversation over football, she meaning Sky, can use that as a connection. Tell Ronnie, don't overanalyze it. It was a quick 2-minute conversation. LOL. Tell him I need him to do this. Bring me home, and then we will get those damn bitches.
Which, by the way, the people she's talking about there are her husband's relatives who are suing her and attempting to get the assets from her husband's estate that she has some claim over. There's been a lot of civil litigation going on here at the same time. So essentially, this is her grand plan to both get out of the criminal aspect of this, and then once she's done that, and once sort of the specter of her being a murderer no longer hangs over her, then they can get the money and everybody in the family will benefit.
And just in case you're still thinking, Alice and Brett, you're reading too much into this letter. This is not witness tampering. This is not witness coaching. I just have to go back to the primary text, her letter, and read you the next paragraph where she says, we're so close to the end. Let's push through. Have the conversation with Ronnie before he meets with Sky. Then tell him to tell Sky at the meeting about the conversation. Hang in there. We're almost there. Love you to the moon. I can't be more clear myself.
This is the kind of letter that if this case goes to trial, and this will be admissible, it's her own statements, so it will definitely be admissible. And it is not attorney-client privilege. It's a letter to her mother, which is a third party. Just imagine you lay out the prosecution. I mean, there's lots of different ways you could build this case. But I think the way I would do it is I would build the case and present the case as if I did not have the letter. And then the very last thing I would do is this letter. So I would prove the case. I would prove she did it. And then just in case there's anybody with lingering doubt, here's the letter where she tries to suborn perjury in an attempt to undermine everything we're saying. And oh, by the way, everything the defense is about to say when they stand up and put on a case, you've already heard it in this letter where she's telling her mom exactly the lies we're going to tell to try and convince a jury that I'm not guilty.
And just because I know all of you are wondering, what does walk the dog mean? I'll just have to read you her own words. Because in the next line, she has like a little bullet point, and she says, take vague notes of all of this so you remember before you walk the dog. So I guess walk the dog was code for her of make sure to take vague notes, and then she wrote it at the top.
I mean, is Ronnie the dog? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's code for something. I don't know, but oh my goodness. So that was only half the letter.
Yeah, it goes on and on. And look, the documents the prosecution are seeking are like 60 pages worth of documents that she's written. So the judge, by the way, did not prevent her from speaking to her mother and her brother in what I think was a very dumb ruling. Frankly, it was like, well, she has the First Amendment right. Okay. You totally could tell her she can't speak to the people she's trying to get to commit perjury in your court in 6 months when they have the trial. But you do you. You're the judge, so that's fine. Judges, as we often say, judges aren't final because they're right. They're right because they're final. So the judge has spoken. She gets to continue to speak to them. And maybe the judge is thinking the more she talks to them, the worse for her anyway. But the judge did deny the motion to dismiss in a ruling that should shock no one. And the hearing was televised. So if you go back, you can find the hearing they had over this motion. I think it was really entertaining. I watched it. I enjoyed it, actually. I think you guys would enjoy it as well, because we often talk about sort of, in Delphi, or in this case, we talk about the prosecution side, we talk about the defense side, and we sort of put forward our position, and other people are putting forward theirs. Maybe Bob Mata is talking about the defense position, or whoever. What was great about that hearing is you get to hear a judge sort of react to the arguments. And, he just didn't have a whole lot for Kouri Richins' defense attorney and the argument she was making. He was perfectly nice. He wasn't disrespectful to her, but he sort of takes apart everything she's saying, even as she's saying it. And eventually he would rule there's no reason. Asking to dismiss this case is absurd. We'll have voir dire. We'll get ourselves a jury. We'll be able to try this case.
So there's probably going to be a trial in this case. So I think there's going to be a lot more to cover in this case, which I mean, like I said, I can't believe that we haven't had a chance to cover this case yet because there's been so much other true crime news. But I think this is a really fascinating case, especially kind of the legal issues it brings up. So there's going to be more. And we've only touched on some things, even though we've gone more than an hour. So, I welcome your questions, what you'd like us to cover that we haven't yet. But I can pretty much promise you we'll be covering this case again as legal developments happen here.
And I can imagine this is one that if it does go to trial, we'll try and do some sort of live coverage of it. I'm fascinated by this case. Yeah,
this one I'm actually fascinated by, not because the attorneys are, making a show of it, because the legal issues and the actual defendant here is just making, which, by the way, if you're going to make news about your case, I'd rather it be the defendant than the lawyers. So
absolutely. So far,
because it's her life.
Yes. It seems like the lawyers they've been fine. So that's always nice. But yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes. But if it does go to trial, which I expect it will, it'll be a fascinating one to watch. And everything up to this point has been televised, so I assume the case will be televised as well. So check it out on Court TV. I'm sure it's coming.
Absolutely. Well, Brett, before we sign off for the day, is there anything you'd like to add about this case? I know we might have some questions to do.
I don't have anything to add about this case. We've talked a lot. I just want to say thank you to all of you who've been supporting us. We've seen sort of an uptick in listens lately. So welcome. All of you out there who are new, we're very happy to have you. I hope you guys will join the gallery, send us emails about stuff you want to hear. We love the people who've been listening for a long time, but we're always happy to add new people to the family.
Absolutely. And we always welcome your questions or thoughts or case recommendations at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Facebook at prosecutorspod. And we are just so thankful to be talking about something other than Delphi.
We really are. And as Alice said, since we last noted that there weren't a whole lot of legal briefs questions, because as you guys know who've been listening, if you do a 5-star review for either podcast, you can leave a question and we'll answer it. Ever since we said that, flood of questions. You guys have responded exactly as we would have hoped.
I love it. I love it. It's been so great to see these questions.
Ton of new questions. So if Alice is up for it, we can.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is a question that gets asked of us a lot. And I think we've answered it before, but we'll answer it again. This is from Melomel, and she asked, will each of you recommend a novel or fictional series / writer who is entertaining but also generally accurate when it comes to law and courtroom proceedings? Normally we're asked this question in terms of movies, and we've said My Cousin Vinny and The Verdict before, which are very, very accurate. Books,
I don't actually read that many legal courtroom fiction. I read a lot of nonfiction that have to do with court cases, and there are some that are fantastic. It's one I've recommended here, which again is it's nonfiction, so it's not what this person's looking for.
Yeah, the thing about the dog's barking downstairs. I don't know if
I can hear. Hey, walk the dog, Brett. Walk the dog.
There you go. The thing about, I'm thinking about true crime books. The problem, take Helter Skelter, which is a famous book about the Manson family and all that jazz. Vince Bugliosi was so full of himself that you read that book and it's like, I know this is supposed to be nonfiction, but it's obviously fiction, because he just thought, he just presents himself as the most brilliant. Everything that happened that went right was him. Like the idiots in the LAPD didn't know what to do until I told them what to do. And it's like, how accurate is that, right? So that's the other thing. You have to think about, everyone who tells a story is telling it from their own perspective. This is something we talk about a lot. I feel like people just miss. There is no such thing as sort of unbiased presentation of a story. Every story is told through the perspective of the person telling the story. And I don't care what it is. And I don't care how academic or whatever, it's always going to have that. So look, John Grisham novels are complete fiction. They're not realistic at all. So that's one thing. But don't think just because you pick up a nonfiction book that all of a sudden it's going to tell you how things really work. Frankly, trials, even the most interesting trial, are pretty boring. I mean, you kind of have to jazz them up a little bit no matter what. So I don't know. That's tough. I mean, as we said,
I have to think about this, and maybe we answered it on a subsequent, because I wasn't ready for books.
Yeah, books is hard. I mean, books really is hard. Okay, we'll think about it. We'll think about it and come back to it. You've stumped us. We're going to try and figure out a fictional book series that is nevertheless realistic. And John Grisham, I love John Grisham books. I've read a ton of his books. They're page turners, but they're page turners because they are fictional.
Kind of like TV dramatized reenactments of court shows, right? Like,
right.
Our court hearings are not that exciting.
They're really not. Okay. Joe wants us to explain Chevron in 45 seconds. If an administrative agency issues a rule and the rule is ambiguous, the court defers to the agency's interpretation of the ambiguous rule. Boom. Did it.
That was textbook. That was literally textbook.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Isner PR asks 2 questions. The first one. This is to both of us. I mean, I guess they're both to both of us. If you had to pick one event to travel back in history and witness, which would you choose?
Gosh, there's so many.
There are so many. And this is like, there was a time back before we even started this podcast where I thought about writing some sort of novel about sort of historians in the future who time travel. And so they time travel for the purpose of recording history. And being a true crime person, I was imagining someone who could travel back, whose job it was to travel back to murders and watch them happen and then report on how they actually happened. Right. And then that would become part of that history and sort of the toll that would take on them. And then eventually, of course, they would travel back to a murder, fall in love with the victim, and then have to figure out a way to change history and fix it. This was my idea for the book I never wrote.
Also, always an author. I love it.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to write the book, do a special, when they make the movie, special thanks, Brett from the prosecutors. But so you could take it that way, that you could travel back and know the truth. Like, I could go back to Dyatlov Pass and watch the radioactive Yetis pour out of the woods and attack the poor defenseless hikers and know that that's what happened. Maybe that's what I would do. That's like in genre. I'm sure some people would say the crucifixion or whatever, but I'm going with Dyatlov Pass. I'm going back to Dyatlov Pass. I'm finding out exactly what happened so I can let you guys all know.
So, these types of questions people always expect you, or I guess they're written in a way kind of to hit on major points in history. But I think for me, it would have to be something personal because you are so formed by those who came before you. And so some of you have heard my story before where, my grandparents fled China when the communists were taking over because my grandfather was in the previous government, and they quite literally left in the dark of night with the clothes on their back, leaving their 1-year-old daughter behind, my aunt. And they knew nothing. They thought they were just walking into death, that this was not, they were not going to be able to get out. And they did. They got out. And if they didn't, my mom wouldn't have been born. I wouldn't be here. But it seems like this unfathomable point in history that my family was a part of. And if none of that had happened, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't exist at all. And to think that they were so young, leaving their child behind, facing the absolute unknown, and they had the bravery to do it, I think would be I would be able to watch something that is incredibly meaningful to my life, but in the context of history. So that would be mine. And
then it would just be called The Prosecutor. Things have been different.
For that, Brett.
See, Alice is very deep, about what she would do. Maybe I'd go back and see the pyramids. I would like to see the pyramids.
I actually was just thinking pyramids.
Glory.
How do they move those blocks, man?
There you go. Can you imagine watching the aliens build the pyramids?
Yeah. If they'd be like, alien number 1, move it here. Tetris. Boom, boom.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, so that's the first question. Alice with a deep answer. I want to see Dyatlov Pass and the pyramids. Okay. Here's the other one. If, this is the same person, if you were stuck on the desert island and could only have one song to play on repeat, which would you choose?
Look, guys, I finally watched the Taylor Swift Eras tour. This is not going to be a deep answer at all, not even a little bit. And this is not going to be my answer probably next week, but it's all I've been listening to for the last 7 days. Fantastic movie. I did not get tickets to the Taylor Swift concert. Taylor, if you're listening, I would do anything to get a ticket to your show, as would many of us. But anyways, the one song that I hadn't really ever listened to before that was on the movie or the show, the tour, that I've been listening to on repeat, and it makes me laugh like crazy, is You Need to Calm Down. And it makes me laugh because it's literally telling paparazzi, you need to calm down. And I just love it. And you know what? If I'm on a desert island for eternity by myself, I want a great Taylor song that I can dance to and just laugh about, because you know what? Life is going to be sad enough.
That's amazing, Alice. I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. Someone pointed out that Taylor Swift, one of her songs, sings the word important, and she sings it exactly how we say it. So to all of you who want us to be like important every time we say it, boom.
Just like
away.
We can say February and Wednesday.
Yeah, I like it. Okay.
We can talk like that if you want us to.
So this is, I see Alice, she gives the great story of her family fleeing communist China and then goes with a Taylor Swift song. See, I was thinking shouldn't I pick something like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony so that I have something very sort of long and inspiring and all this other
Brett,
stuff.
never change who you are.
Never change who you are. I mean, my favorite song is my favorite song is Shelter from the Storm by Bob Dylan. I love that song. I think I've mentioned that before. So I don't know if I would just pick my favorite song. If I had to hear a song to listen to over and over again, would I just pick my favorite one? Would I become sick of it? I mean, I don't know. It's hard if you had to only listen to one song for all eternity. That's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I guess I could listen to the greatest song ever written, Somewhere in Jackson, just on a loop forever. I could do that. That one's a banger.
It is a banger. And it's one that will never be too short.
It'll never be too short. And it'll never change.
And it'll bring back all the memories of our hundreds of episodes that you've recorded.
Exactly.
So it's like listening to hundreds of songs.
Exactly. And someone in the chat just pointed out, we do want to congratulate Taylor Swift on her award as Person of the Year. So, congratulations to you, Tay-Tay.
Tay-Tay.
I haven't read it yet. Did she mention our episode? Or
Yeah. Yeah. It's at the top. It says Walk the Dog / prosecutors did an episode about me.
Oh, that's awesome.
You have to read between the lines. You have to really read between the lines.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I got, Alice. We'll save the rest of the questions.
We will. Well, thanks for ending on a fun note. But all of you, please write us your thoughts. If your favorite songs, your favorite fiction, nonfiction books, we'd love to hear. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is The Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. It while I finished my puzzle yesterday, finally.
Wow.
I need to start my
awesome.
Christmas puzzle. This is my non-Christmas puzzle, and I needed to clear space from my dining room table to now have a Christmas. So I put in the last piece. I don't know if anyone else does this. I put in the last piece, 1,000-piece puzzle, and then looked at it and immediately messed it up. It's kind of like life, you know?
What do you mean you messed it up?
I put it away. As
You
soon
took
as
it
I put in the
apart?
last, I took it apart. The second I put it in, I looked at it, and then I was like, it is done. And then I put it all away. It was
Wow.
cathartic. It was really cathartic. It felt right.